So while wandering the wash yesterday, I found this scene with this interesting looking plant, just kind of branches arching down and all these beautiful little yellow leaves. And I'm not sure what kind of bush or tree it is, but there's a lot of them along the washes here. And composition was tricky, and I'm not 100% happy with what I came up with. I think it's just the best I could do with the given angles of everything, and we'll see how it's measured chaos, but I don't know. We'll see. But I did expose a single sheet of Provia 100, and yeah, feels good to get the first exposure out of the way. And it is a chilly morning, man. My fingers are freezing. Did not bring my gloves with me. But there's another scene around the corner, some pine cones on the ground, which I think I'm gonna head over to that next. There's some light coming from a big sandstone cliff over there. It's reflecting into the scene, so feels really good to expose some film. That's for sure. So I went ahead and set up a composition with the scene you see behind me here, with the pine cones and pine needles, and it's in a very soft reflected light right now. And I exposed a single sheet of Provia 100F, and you might notice that I have not used Velvia 50 yet, and the reason for that is, well, that film stock has been discontinued in large format, so I only have a few boxes left of it, and a scene like this would do pretty well with Provia anyways, because there's some darker tones in there, and Velvia might be a little too contrasty for it. But I feel pretty good about finding another scene here and shooting that. There's a subject a little ways up the wash I'm excited about getting a composition on. It's one that I was scouting out yesterday, some pine trees set up against some sandstone. So after getting everything packed up, I'm gonna head over there, see about setting up a composition. That one will be good in hopefully the early afternoon, so long as the weather holds out, and I think it will. But definitely a great way to start the day. So it's a little after 1:40, and I've got a pretty simple composition set up, vertical composition of those pine trees back there. And I'm using my 450mm lens, and I'm waiting for the moment when that wall back there drops fully into shade, because the sun is going to shift back behind that large sandstone formation there. And then when it does, it's going to lower the contrast of the scene. At that point, the light source is going to be all the light bouncing off all this area in here, as well as from the blue sky. So one of the variables is really going to be the wind. And so I'll definitely need a break in the wind, because I'm shooting in the shade with 100 speed film, and my shutter speed's probably going to be a second or so maybe somewhere in that range. But it'll be interesting to see how this all works out. I'm really looking forward to perhaps exposing film on a third subject today. And then if this all works out, there is a fourth subject I wouldn't mind trying to shoot as well, making use of these really, really great conditions with the calm skies, no clouds, and pretty subdued wind. So looking forward to seeing how this all works out. Well, that worked out pretty well. I waited for a nice break in the wind, and I exposed a sheet of Provia 100F. And then I exposed a second sheet of Provia, this time with a warming filter, because Provia goes a little bit cooler. And I did also expose a sheet of Velvia 50. And I think this will be an interesting learning experience to see how Provia does in this situation with a warming filter as compared to Velvia. I've been here for probably about 3.5, 4 hours sitting on this shot. And in that time, I just left the camera here and I wandered around, and I found another area that was really cool nearby. with all these dead pine trees set up against some sandstone, which I think will make for a fantastic photo. Kind of a late morning sort of photo. So if the conditions are right, I'll head back for that one tomorrow, or at least some point on this trip. But now it's time to get my camera packed up and head over to that other location, see about maybe photographing that fourth scene if it's good enough for it. Because right now the skies are still perfectly blue, the wind is pretty calm, and these are ideal conditions for photographing in reflected light. So let's get things packed up and head over there and see if I can find anything else. After packing my gear, I visited a nearby canyon and framed a horizontal composition of 3 large ponderosa pines. The entire scene bathed in beautifully warm reflected light. The wind was calm and the conditions were ideal, so I exposed a sheet of both Provia and Velvia, but more on that photograph later. I'm not overly pleased with the first photograph I shot that day. The subject is interesting and the light is pleasant, but the composition feels a bit awkward. I know there's potential here, but I didn't find it this time. I am, however, quite pleased with the photograph of the pine cones and the pine needles. The repetition of pattern and a hint of both warm and cool color gives this simple scene tremendous depth. I've had my eye on this type of subject for quite some time, and I'm glad it finally worked out. I'm also quite pleased with the photograph of the 2 pine trees set against light-colored sandstone. By waiting for this subject to fall in the shadow, I reduced the overall contrast of the scene, greatly simplifying the photograph. My camera placement for this image was critical. I first prioritized the relationship between the trees, then lowered my camera position to minimize a bright spot in the foreground. Thankfully, I had several hours to fine-tune the composition. My final photograph that day is one I've wanted to capture for several years now, but I never quite had the right conditions. The tree in the lower left is often bright red, pulling attention away from the rest of the scene. This year, that same tree turned a shade of rusty orange, complementing both the canyon wall and the trunk of the nearby ponderosa pine. Witnessing change like this is one of the many reasons why I love returning to familiar locations. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you around next time. If you enjoy this ad-free and clickbait-free content and want to help me live my dream, a voluntary contribution of just $24 a year helps keep my gas tank full and my film freezer stocked. For more information on how to support me and my work, please visit the donation section of my website at benhorn.com/donate. I also have prints in my portfolio box set available on my website. You can find a direct link down below in the show notes. Thanks in advance for your support.